My name is John Williams, and for 32 years, I believed in hard work, loyalty, and the power of dedication. I'm a foreman at Peterson Construction, been there for 8 years now, working my way up from carrying tools to managing crews. My hands are permanently stained with grease and calloused from steel and concrete, but I've never been ashamed of honest work. Every blister earned helped build the life I thought I wanted. I married my high school sweetheart, Bethany, B, I called her, 3 weeks after graduation. She was 18, golden hair always catching sunlight, with this laugh that made my chest tight in the best way. We were those kids everyone said would never last, too young and too broke to make it work. But we proved them wrong, or so I thought. While my classmates partied through college, I was pulling double shifts to pay for our tiny apartment, then saving for a house down payment, then working overtime to fill that house with the life she deserved. Bethany stayed home, and that was our arrangement. Traditional, maybe old-fashioned, but it worked. She maintained our space, cooked dinner most nights, handled the domestic side while I handled everything else. I'd come home exhausted from 12-hour days to find her curled up on the couch, usually watching some reality show, always beautiful even in sweatpants. She'd smile and ask about my day, and I'd feel that same chest-tightening sensation from high school, grateful that she'd chosen to build this life with me. The lotus tattoo came from our honeymoon in Thailand, our one real extravagance. She'd gotten it on her lower back, a delicate black design that curved perfectly with her spine. I'd traced it with my fingers on lazy Sunday mornings, this intimate mark that belonged to us, to our beginning as husband and wife. That Thursday night in March, I'd just finished a 16-hour shift installing emergency fire exits at the new medical center. The job was behind schedule, the client was breathing down our necks, and I'd been living on coffee and adrenaline for 3 days straight. I dragged myself home at nearly midnight, expecting to find Bethany already asleep. She was, curled up in our bed with her phone still glowing beside her on the nightstand. I kissed her forehead gently, not wanting to wake her, then headed to the kitchen for something to eat. Leftover pizza straight from the box, standing at the counter in work clothes that smelled like sawdust and metal shavings. I'd been scrolling Reddit mindlessly, looking for something to shut off my brain before attempting sleep. Construction forums, funny videos, random threads, the usual digital white noise. Then I saw it. The post was in a local hookup subreddit I didn't even know existed. The thumbnail was small, but something about the angle, the lighting, made me stop scrolling. I clicked before my conscious mind caught up. Our bedroom. The cream-colored walls I'd painted myself, the vintage mirror she'd found at an estate sale, the reading lamp we'd bought together at Target. And there was Bethany, naked from behind, that lotus tattoo unmistakable, posting to a forum asking for discreet encounters while my husband works late. My phone fell from my hands, clattering against the kitchen counter. I stared at the black screen for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then I picked it up with shaking hands and looked again, hoping I'd imagined it, hoping it was someone else's bedroom, someone else's wife, someone else's entire world turning to ash. But there was the lotus, there was our bed, there was the woman I'd worked myself half to death to provide for, advertising herself to strangers on the internet. The post was 3 hours old. 3 hours. While I'd been installing safety equipment to keep people alive, she'd been in our bed, in our home, soliciting men online. The timestamp showed she'd posted it at 9:47 p.m., right around the time she'd texted me asking when I'd be home, telling me not to wake her because she was exhausted from cleaning all day. I read the post again, memorizing every word. She'd described herself as a lonely housewife whose husband was always working. She wanted someone young and energetic who could show her what she's been missing. The whole thing was written in a breathy, seductive tone I'd never heard from her in our entire marriage. The comments were worse. Dozens of men responding with explicit messages, describing what they wanted to do to her, where they wanted to meet, and there, buried in the thread, were her responses. Bethany, my wife, flirting back with enthusiasm I'd forgotten she possessed. My chest felt hollow, like someone had reached in and scooped out everything vital. I sat down heavily on one of our kitchen stools, the ones she'd picked out, that I'd assembled while she watched, and tried to process what I was seeing. Every late night I'd worked, every double shift, every time I'd come home exhausted and she'd already eaten dinner, already gone to bed, already made plans that didn't include me. How long had this been going on? How many men had she been talking to while I'd been breaking my back to keep us comfortable? I created a throwaway account. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before I started typing. I wrote, "Interested. Can you verify you're real?" I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The response came faster than I'd expected. Bethany was apparently still awake, still online, still actively hunting while I sat in our kitchen processing the destruction of everything I'd believed about my life. Her reply appeared, "Of course, honey. What kind of verification do you need?" The casual endearment hit like a physical blow. Honey. She called me that sometimes, but rarely, and never with that playful emoji. Never with the flirtatious undertone that radiated from every word in her messages. I created a persona quickly, Jake, a divorced electrician from the next town over, successful enough to be interesting but discreet by necessity. Someone stable, someone who wouldn't complicate her life, someone exactly like the responses she'd been favorably replying to in her thread. I typed back, "Just want to make sure you're not a bot or some guy catfishing. Maybe another picture? Something that shows this is really you." The wait felt eternal. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. She was typing, then deleting, then typing again. Finally, another photo appeared. This one was different, more intimate. She was lying on our bed, our sheets, wearing the black lingerie I'd bought her for Valentine's Day. The lingerie she'd smiled at politely, kissed me on the cheek for, then apparently never worn. For me. But she'd worn it for Jake. For a stranger on the internet she'd been talking to for less than 10 minutes. She messaged, "Better? I don't usually do this, but something about your profile seems different. More mature." More mature. I almost laughed, except nothing about this situation was funny. I was her husband, the man who'd been mature enough to work himself into the ground to give her everything she'd ever asked for. But mature wasn't exciting, apparently. Mature was something that happened to other people while she looked for adventure online. We talked for hours that night. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to her breathe softly through the bedroom door, while she told Jake about her marriage, her loneliness, her desire for something more passionate than what she had at home. She wrote, "My husband is a good man, but he works so much. And when he's home, he's just tired. We barely connect anymore. I feel invisible." Invisible. I read the word 3 times, trying to process it. I'd been working 16-hour days to keep her comfortable, to pay for the house she'd wanted, the car she'd picked out, the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. I'd been doing everything I thought a good husband should do, and she felt invisible. I asked, "What are you looking for?" Her response came quickly. "Excitement. Passion. Someone who wants to explore, you know? Someone who makes me feel desired instead of just convenient." Convenient. The word lodged in my throat like a stone. She told Jake about her fantasies, about positions and scenarios she'd never mentioned to me in 14 years of marriage. She described herself as adventurous, open-minded, eager to try new things with the right person. This was a woman I didn't recognize, speaking a language she'd never used with me. I finally asked, "When could we meet?" My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she'd hear it through the walls. She replied, "My husband works most Saturdays. Next weekend, maybe? Somewhere discreet, obviously. I've never done anything like this before." She was lying. The ease with which she navigated the conversation, the practiced way she deflected personal questions while maintaining intimacy, the casual mention of discretion, this wasn't her first time. Maybe not her first affair. I suggested a restaurant across town, near where her sister lived. Neutral territory, I explained, somewhere neither of us would run into people we knew. She agreed immediately, even seemed excited by the location choice. She promised, "I'll wear something special, something that shows I'm serious about this." I looked at the kitchen clock, 2:47 a.m. I'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, most of it spent watching my wife enthusiastically plan to cheat on me with a man who didn't exist. In the bedroom, she'd finally gone quiet, probably fallen asleep with her phone in her hand, dreaming about her upcoming adventure. I sat in the dark for another hour, staring at our conversation thread, memorizing every word. The woman in those messages wasn't someone I knew. She wasn't the girl I'd married, the quiet homebody who preferred Netflix to nightlife, who claimed to be too tired for much of anything lately. She was someone else entirely, someone who'd been hiding behind the face I'd been kissing goodnight for years. Saturday was 5 days away. 5 days to figure out exactly what I was going to do with this information, how I was going to handle the moment when Bethany realized that Jake wasn't a stranger at all. 5 days to decide what kind of man I was going to become. Friday morning, I called in sick for the first time in 2 years. Peterson wasn't happy about it. We had deadlines breathing down our necks, but I told him it was a family emergency. Not exactly a lie. The law office of Sarah, attorney at law, occupied the 3rd floor of a downtown building that had seen better decades. Her receptionist, a woman with steel gray hair and knowing eyes, led me to a conference room that smelled like coffee and determination. Sarah turned out to be nothing like I'd expected. Maybe 40, compact and sharp-edged, with the kind of direct stare that suggested she'd heard every story and seen every type of human wreckage that walked through her door. She said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk, "Mr. Williams, you mentioned adultery on the phone. What exactly are we dealing with?" I'd prepared for this conversation, but laying it out in clinical terms still felt surreal. I showed her the screenshots I'd taken, the original post, the subsequent conversation, the photos Bethany had sent to Jake. Sarah examined each image methodically, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. She said finally, "This is quite thorough. Most men in your situation come to me with suspicions and hurt feelings. You've got documentation." I replied, "I work in construction. You don't build anything solid without a good foundation." She smiled at that. The first time her expression had softened since I'd walked in and said, "Smart. Now tell me about your assets." We spent the next hour dissecting my marriage from a legal perspective. The house was in both our names, but I'd made every payment. The cars, the savings account, the furniture, all purchased with my income while Bethany had contributed nothing financial to our household in over a decade. Sarah explained, "Illinois is a no-fault state, but adultery can still influence asset division, especially when there's evidence of deception and a pattern of financial dependence. The fact that she's been actively seeking encounters while you've been the sole provider works in your favor." She quoted me a retainer fee that would have been devastating 6 months ago. Now it felt like the best investment I'd ever made. I said, "I want papers drawn up before tomorrow. Clean, straightforward, no contest expected." She looked at me and said, "You sound confident about that." I replied simply, "I am." That afternoon, I drove to 3 different electronics stores, paying cash for a small digital camera and a portable printer. If Bethany wanted to play games with documentation, I'd make sure every piece of evidence was preserved properly. Back home, I moved through our house like a stranger, seeing everything differently. The wedding photos on the mantle looked like exhibits in a museum of someone else's life. The kitchen where we'd shared morning coffee felt like a stage set. Even our bedroom, especially our bedroom, had transformed into a crime scene. Bethany was unusually chatty when she got home from whatever she'd been doing all day. She kissed my cheek, asked about work, mentioned she might visit her sister on Saturday. The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly, I wondered how many others I'd missed over the years. I said casually, "That's nice. You haven't seen Linda in a while?" She replied easily, "Yeah, she's been asking me to come up for weeks. I thought I'd make a day of it, maybe do some shopping." Shopping. Right. She'd be shopping for a new life, assuming Jake turned out to be everything she was hoping for. I spent Friday evening in my workshop in the garage, organizing tools and trying to keep my hands busy. Bethany flitted around the house with unusual energy, doing laundry, cleaning bathrooms, even vacuuming the living room. She was preparing, getting everything perfect before her big adventure. Around 9, I heard the shower running upstairs. She was in there for nearly an hour, longer than usual, certainly longer than necessary for someone planning to visit her sister. When she emerged, her legs were freshly shaved and she smelled like the expensive perfume I'd bought her for our anniversary. I said from the doorway, "You smell nice." She turned, startled, then smiled and replied, "Just felt like treating myself. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I'd never known how it was to lie so effortlessly to someone I'd promised to love forever. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, typical March weather that couldn't decide between winter and spring. Bethany was up early, moving around the house with purpose. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a blue dress I'd never seen before, paired with heels that made her legs look longer. I commented, gesturing to the dress, "That's new." She replied without missing a beat, "Oh, this old thing? I've had it forever." Another lie. The tags were probably still in the trash from yesterday's shopping trip. She kissed me goodbye at the door, the same perfunctory peck she'd been giving me for months, and said, "I'll probably be back late. Linda wants to catch up properly." I replied, meaning it, "Drive safe." Whatever happened today, I didn't want her hurt. I just wanted her gone. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then got dressed myself. Dark jeans, a button-down shirt she'd bought me for Christmas, boots that could handle whatever this day might throw at me. I looked like someone who'd already moved on, someone who wasn't devastated by betrayal but merely inconvenienced by necessary business. The restaurant was 45 minutes away in a strip mall near Linda's neighborhood. I'd chosen it specifically, close enough to make Bethany's lie even more obvious, public enough that she couldn't cause a scene, familiar enough that I'd be comfortable when comfortable was the last thing she'd be feeling. I arrived early, requested a table with a clear view of the entrance, and ordered coffee I didn't want while I waited for my wife to walk in expecting to meet her lover. The divorce papers were folded neatly in my jacket pocket, along with printed copies of every screenshot, every message, every piece of evidence that would make denial impossible. In 15 minutes, Bethany would discover that Jake wasn't real, that her husband wasn't stupid, that actions, even secret ones, especially secret ones, had consequences. In 15 minutes, both our lives would change forever. She walked in at exactly 2 p.m., and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. Bethany had transformed herself into someone I barely recognized. The blue dress clung to curves I'd stopped noticing in our daily routine. Her hair was styled differently, and she moved with a confidence I hadn't seen since high school. She looked beautiful, radiant even, in a way that made my chest ache with loss and rage. She was wearing the sapphire earrings I'd given her for Christmas. I watched her scan the restaurant, her eyes bright with nervous excitement. She checked her phone, probably looking for a message from Jake, wondering where he was, maybe getting cold feet. Her gaze swept past me twice before recognition hit. The change was instantaneous and devastating. The confident smile froze, then cracked, then disappeared entirely. Her face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before: confusion, recognition, terror, and finally, a desperate calculation as she tried to figure out if there was any way to salvage this situation. There wasn't. I stood up slowly, made eye contact, and gestured to the empty chair across from me. I said quietly, "Hello, Bethany." She stood frozen in the entrance for what felt like an eternity. Other diners were starting to notice. A woman in a blue dress having some kind of breakdown near the hostess station. Finally, survival instinct kicked in and she walked over, each step looking like it took enormous effort. She stammered, "John, what are you, this isn't—" I said quietly, "Sit down." She sat, her hands shaking as she placed them on the table. Up close, I could see the careful makeup job, the subtle contouring, the shade of lipstick she'd never worn for me. She'd spent hours preparing for this moment, planning for an afternoon of passion with a stranger, and now she was staring at her husband instead. She said, confused, "How did you— I don't understand what's happening." I pulled out my phone, opened the Reddit app, and showed her our conversation thread. Her eyes went wide, then wider, as she scrolled through messages she'd thought were private, intimate exchanges with someone who didn't exist. I explained, "Jake's not real. Jake is me. Every message you sent, every photo, every plan you made, you were talking to your husband." The color drained from her face completely. She pleaded, "John, please, I can explain." I cut her off. "Explain what? That you've been advertising yourself online while I worked 16-hour days to support us? That you've been planning to cheat on me in the bed I paid for with money I earned breaking my back for 14 years? She started crying then, but they weren't the tears of someone genuinely remorseful. They were the tears of someone who'd been caught, someone who was searching desperately for an angle, a way to turn this around. She whispered, "It wasn't real. It was just fantasy. Just online stuff. I never would have actually." I pointed out, "You're here. You got dressed up, you lied about visiting your sister, you drove 40 minutes to meet a stranger for sex. Which part of that wasn't real?" I pulled the divorce papers from my jacket and slid them across the table, saying, "I've already filed these. You have 30 days to contest, but I wouldn't recommend it." She stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language and said desperately, "John, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can—" I said simply, "I don't want to work it out." The finality in my voice seemed to hit her harder than anything else I'd said. She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Panic. Real panic. As she realized I wasn't here to fight for our marriage or demand explanations or give her a chance to make it right. I was here to end it. She said frantically, "You can't just throw away 14 years because of some stupid mistake." I replied, "This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Multiple choices over what I'm guessing was months or years. The only mistake was mine, thinking I knew who I married." I stood up, left a 20 on the table for the coffee I'd barely touched, and said, "Your things will be packed and shipped to Linda's by Tuesday. The house keys should be left on the kitchen counter." She called out, "John, wait!" But I was already walking away, past the other diners who'd been pretending not to watch our table, past the hostess who'd seen enough drama to know when it was over. I could hear Bethany calling my name, but I didn't turn around. Outside, the March air felt clean and sharp in my lungs. I drove home slowly, taking the long way, letting the reality settle into my bones. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my driveway now, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. The house felt different immediately, not empty. Bethany's physical presence had become so minimal over the years that her absence wasn't a shock. It felt clean, honest, like a space where I could finally exhale without wondering what lies were being told in the next room. I packed her belongings methodically over the next 2 days. Clothes, toiletries, the romance novels she'd collected but never seemed to read, photo albums from a marriage that had apparently been a performance. I found things I'd forgotten she owned, gifts from me that had been shoved in drawers, unused and clearly unwanted. The divorce proceeded exactly as Sarah had predicted. Bethany never contested the papers, never tried to claim assets she hadn't earned, never even attempted to contact me after that day in the restaurant. Linda called once, crying, apologizing for something she hadn't done and couldn't control. I told her she was welcome to visit any time. I'd always liked Bethany's sister, and her loyalty to family didn't change the fact that her sister had destroyed ours. The house felt larger without the constant undercurrent of tension I hadn't realized I'd been living with. I started cooking again, really cooking, instead of grabbing fast food between shifts. I bought groceries based on what I wanted to eat, not what someone else might tolerate. I watched movies I actually enjoyed instead of background noise for someone else's disinterest. Work became something different too. I'd been using overtime as an escape from a home that had stopped feeling like home, but now I had a reason to come back each evening. My own space, arranged exactly how I wanted it, occupied by someone who wasn't performing happiness for an audience of one. The guys at work noticed the change, though most were tactful enough not to ask directly. Peterson pulled me aside after a few weeks, wanting to make sure I was handling whatever family emergency had kept me out that Friday. I told him, "I'm handling it fine. Better than fine, actually." He nodded, the kind of understanding that comes from experience with life's curveballs, and said, "Good man. Take care of yourself." I started sleeping better than I had in years. No more lying awake wondering why Bethany seemed so distant, why conversations felt forced, why intimacy had become a scheduled obligation rather than genuine connection. No more subconscious stress from living with someone who was fundamentally dishonest about who she was and what she wanted. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Bethany, using a new phone, asking if we could talk. I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to say. Some evenings I sit on the porch I built with my own hands, drinking beer I bought with money I earned, in a house that's finally, completely mine. I think about those 14 years sometimes, but not with regret. They taught me something valuable about the difference between being wanted and being needed, between love and convenience, between building a life and simply maintaining one. I'd worked myself half to death trying to provide for someone who saw my dedication as a weakness to exploit rather than a strength to appreciate. Now I work for myself, live for myself, make decisions based on what will make me genuinely happy rather than what might earn me gratitude I'll never receive. The betrayal hurt, but the liberation that followed hurt more. The painful realization of how much of myself I'd lost trying to make someone else happy. How much life I'd missed while focused on earning love that was never really there. I don't hate Bethany anymore. Hatred requires energy and emotional investment I'm not willing to spare. She made her choices, revealed who she really was, and gave me the gift of clarity. For that, in a strange way, I'm grateful. These days, when people ask if I'm dating, I tell them I'm not in any hurry. I'm learning to enjoy my own company again, to build a life that's authentically mine rather than a compromise between what I want and what someone else might accept. Someday, maybe I'll meet someone who appreciates dedication rather than resenting it, who sees partnership as addition rather than subtraction, someone who chooses honesty even when lies would be easier. But if I don't, that's fine too. I've learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, and I'm no longer afraid of either. The house is quiet these days, but it's a peaceful quiet. The quiet of someone who finally knows exactly who he is and exactly what he's worth. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.